Welcome to our first online event in 2019. Today we are going to discuss about Lightning Web Component, and we have Mohit with us, who is going to share his valuable knowledge about around Lightning Web Component with us. So without any further delay, let me go to the next slide. I would like to thank Appirio and Cloud Vandana for helping us and also sponsoring this event and our community. Quick introduction of myself. My name is Sudipta Dev. I'm a Salesforce technical architect currently working with Appirio. I have my own blog which is sudipta-dev.in. I'm a Salesforce certified technical architect, and I'm also leading the Kitchener CA developer group. I have around 311 traded badges, and my Twitter handle is sudipta_1984. With that one, I'll request Mahit to give his own introduction. Over to you, Mahit.
Let's see.
You are the presenter now, Mike.
Yeah. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen, Mike.
All right. So a little bit of introduction about myself. My name is Mohit. I've been in Salesforce ecosystem now for almost 8 years. Currently, I work as a technical architect at Code Science, at Salesforce MVP. Last year, I was privileged to author this book, Learning Salesforce Application, Lightning Application Development. So if you are interested, check it out. And I do write some blogs. One of the places where I do blog a lot is Medium. So I have the link there if you're interested. Also, you can follow me on my Twitter handle at mshrivastava30. So let's get started here. Just making sure, Sudipta, we can hear, right? You guys can hear me out, right?
Yes, we can hear you, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks for the confirmation. So yeah, so our agenda today is we're gonna explore web components first. So since web components is a standard part of W3C, we're gonna explore the fundamentals of the web component before we actually go deep into the Lightning Web Component. So Lightning Web Components is the Salesforce version of web component standards. So we're gonna be discussing that, and then we're gonna discuss some tooling support for LWC. So LWC here is Lightning Web Component. Since it's long word, I just want to abbreviate that LWC so that it's easier. And then we're gonna take some demos of how we can build a Lightning Web Component, and we'll compare and contrast with Lightning Web Components and previously our Aura components. And the web components and Aura components interpolate, meaning you can use web components inside Aura components, but vice versa is not true. And we'll explore some of those. And lastly, we will explore some very minute details around like what are Lightning Web Component properties, data services that Salesforce provide, how we can use UI APIs, etc., etc. So unfortunately, we won't be having lots of demos around that, but the documentation from Salesforce is clear, and we'll cover fundamentals in this talk, so that you guys can explore other things that are here provided by Salesforce. And at last, I'll leave some time so that we can have Q&A and get some feedback around get your feedback and also get some doubts clarified. So let's get started here. So before even I start into Lightning Web Components, let's understand what is a web components, right? When did it came into existence, what it is, what are its components, what are its pillars, and so on. So why web components, right? Why did something like web components came into existence? So the reason why web components came into existence is because you want to really build ones. If you look at the web pages, right, like 5 years ago, you will see that there's a lot of code that's been repeated again and again. So specifically both around the markup that you write, the JavaScript that you write, although JavaScript can be made reusable to much extent, but if you look at the front end, front end of your web page or any web page, if you take, you'll find a lot of code. It's repeated, and you tend to actually repeat them. So what web components actually try to achieve is standardization and reusability. That is, they introduce few tags. We're gonna take a look at them, like templates, export, imports, which allow you to write sort of, create reusable modules, so that you can write once and use it, in your application multiple times. The other reason why the web components came into existence was, composition. So composition is basically dividing your whole application into small chunks or modules. Now, the reason why we do that is because it eases the maintainability, right? You don't have to, sort of look at your application as a monolithic layer, and instead, it's very easy to break your application into smaller chunks so that they can be debugged, maintained properly. And then the other reason why the web components came into existence is encapsulation. So we're going to take a look at what is Shadow DOM today, and what is encapsulation basically. So encapsulation is like, one of the examples of encapsulation that I'll show you how Shadow DOM provides is, you can reach out to the DOM, like, the DOM that you have as a shadow. Your CSS that you write for the outer div will not actually bleed into the encapsulated DOM. So it kind of provides a well-defined boundary to work with, and make sure that your code that you're writing is only adhered to that specific boundary. So we're gonna take a look at that as well. Um, and standardization. So the other important why web components came into existence is standardization. So prior to web components specification, you'd have heard about different frameworks on the front end, right? Like React, Vue.js, AngularJS, or a bundle, or a components from Salesforce. So these were all, sort of custom programmed. And if you look at the code for each of these frameworks, they're all different. Um, so the reason, meaning it becomes very hard, as a front end developer to sort of, take the Vue code and use it in React, vice versa, or use the React code in Angular, etc., etc. So there's no standards, right? So what web components try to do is they try to create a sort of standardization so that it can be adopted across various browsers. It's a standardization on the front end, and most of the specifications that are already defined by web components are, well supported by majority of the browsers. Now, there are few things that are not supported in the browsers today, but eventually the hope is that every specification will be supported natively by the browser. And the web in 2019 is actually headed towards, the web development is headed towards web component development heavily. So that's why I think Salesforce, came up with their own Lightning Web Component, so that they become part of the whole standardization, etc., etc. We'll see. What are these? So before we kind of move on to like a little demo that I have about web components, where we will look into the code, let's look at the what was the existing approach and how does web components solve. So if you look at today's, or let's say 5 years back, a page, you would see that you have like DOM elements, JS or CSS libraries, and then you have UI components. That was the existing approach, right? That's what frameworks usually adopt to. But look at web components, you have just DOM and then the UI components, basically. So it standardizes a lot of things for us. So let's take an example before we actually kind of deep dive into that. But before taking an example and looking at it, let's discuss the core elements of the web component, and then side by side I'll show you what all these means and how we're gonna, how that can improve things, both from the development perspective and also maintainability, and provides all those values that I showed you, like encapsulation, You know, it also supports inheritance mm, and whatever we see, the reusability and the standardization. So let's take so the four core elements of web component, like what are the four core elements of the web component? We also call it as pillars, basically HTML templates. We're gonna see what is a template, and then ability to create your own custom elements, meaning you can create your own tag and the browser starts recognizing that, and then you can reuse that in multiple places. And then the other additional capability is the shadow DOM. So we're going to discuss how to create a shadow DOM, and then what are its capabilities, and then ES modules, which is basically the import and export statements, which is taking a piece of JavaScript function and wrapping them into module, and then you can export that into other module. So you can import multiple modules by specifying export on each of the modules. So we're going to take a look at some examples of that. So let's start. So let's start with what are templates, right? So let's go to one of the templates that I've created. So the template, as you can see, one of the things is so template tag is what defines a template. So if you look at this HTML page, now this is not in Salesforce or anywhere, it's just running on my local machine, and I just created a template.html page basically. So what it does is you define something like template, you give an ID. I've just used this input tag, which is basically a slider, so that I can define min and max value for it as I drag down. So let's see this page in the browser, how this looks and what this template tag actually does. So let me actually go to current working directory. I'm gonna go. I can do this thing actually. So if you're on a Visualforce, you can always copy the full path so I'm using Visual Studio Code Editor, and we're gonna see actually the advantages of using that. There's a lot of plugins that are available. You can also build your own plugin, so it makes perfect editor of choice for me because there's a lot of flexibility to it. So I'm gonna copy the whole path here and then go to the browser. Sorry, can someone mute please for me? If so, just repeating, if you're not actually if you're not uh, muted, please do that, because that's gonna so this is my simple HTML page that got rendered now. So basically it's just a slider, nothing fancy here. I just used HTML. But notice this, I've used something like a template tag, and then there is this little script. So let's see what happens when I comment out the script, right? Let me comment out that script. So let's go ahead, comment out that script, right? I just commented it out. Now what is the expectation here? So the expectation, let me close this so that let's save this. Let's do this actually. Sorry about this. Don't save multiple things that I'm working on. Everything is lost. Okay, so let's see this. So what I did is I commented out the script part. I just left the template here. So what's the normal expectation? So our behavior is like, what would I expect? So if it is a HTML tag, we know that it will render on the page, right? As soon as I load the page. But what will happen here? Let's see. So it did not render, right? It did not render. So let's look at the browser. So as soon as I commented out the script tag, right? This is the tag I commented, but still you can see there is this div element, there is this input range, there is this something called shadow root, which is interesting. Anyway, so this did not actually render, right? That's interesting because in HTML, what we have learned till now is anything that you write should actually render on the page, right? So let's take this div outside the template actually. So let me actually go ahead and just put it here, and let's comment out this template tag now. Or maybe we can leave this template tag just like as it is here for the time being. So let's see what happens now. Okay, it showed up, right? Interesting. So what did template allowed us to do? So basically, template what it did is it kind of made sure that whatever is there inside this template did not actually render. You know, so the first behavior of the template tag, and you're gonna see that lighting, web components, you have to begin with a template tag. So template tags are an important aspect of this. So what is a template tag? So basically, template tag allows us to load HTML tags without rendering them on initial load. So that's a very powerful capability, right? You can write whole lot of markup here and then just not render that, So how do you render that then? So the way you render that is by creating the script tag and saying that, so if you can always access the template tag by its document ID, which I say, yeah, my slider, and then you can access the content that is inside this, whatever is there, by using template.content, and then you can append it to the body, or you can append it wherever you want, basically using the JavaScript. So that's the powerful feature of the templates. It doesn't render on the page, but it still gives you that, all the HTML inside it by, accessing using its ID and then appending it to the main DOM actually. So that's the powerful property of the template. So as soon as I uncomment that script, you can see that it just loads everything, and yeah, it just loaded everything. So as you can see, uh, you know, it got rendered now on the screen. So this is very powerful property of templates. So templates are basis of everything. So any tag that you define in the lighting, you will see that we'll pull up the code for Salesforce lighting components, and you will see that any lighting component or the web component that you will write will have this template tag to begin with. So what this allows you to do is reuse this template across, right? So once you write this, like this kind of a script, right, you can append it to any DOM, and you can have multiple of these, rendered just by using JavaScript you know, without having to too much worry about the tree, the DOM tree, and what goes inside the root or child, etc., etc. You can simply lay out a tag on the page and then just reference that. Um, so let's actually look at what are slots actually. So we'll come to the shadow DOM in a bit, but we will see that templates along with shadow DOM actually makes it more meaningful. Templates, custom elements, and shadow DOM. So these are three things that will make it more meaningful. So before that, I just want to explain what is slots. So slots are like placeholders. So basically, in this template, if you define a slot, and then you say slot name, what is the name of the slot, let's say test, and then you close the slot. So basically, when you define a slot, what it means is next time when you actually use this template in anywhere, you are free to write your own HTML markup inside the place. So slot is a placeholder basically for inserting more markups. So I don't want to go into detail of slots, but note that slots are very helpful. Let's say you want to uh, let's say you have a paragraph or a div, and you want to leave a placeholders so that this becomes more reusable. You can define slots inside the templates, and when this template gets reused, you can actually replace the slots with HTML content there. So that's the power of slots. Actually, for the better documentation, I would say refer Mozilla's developer network, a website that has a lot of details around slots and templates, etc., etc., and how these things actually tie up. Um, okay, so now that we covered this template demo, and again we explored the capability that it doesn't render on the load, but you can lazily load it by using script tag. You can access the element and then you can, access the content of it. Then you can append it. So templates make it more friendlier. So the other feature of web components, and this is very important feature actually, um, is allowing us to define an element and let browser learn about the new tag. So for example, what these lines are very important actually. So so in this case, what I am doing is I'm telling the browser, or I'm defining that, hey, my custom element, whatever you have here, at the bottom, my custom element. So whenever I have an HTML tag with my custom element, associate that, with this particular class element, which is my custom element here. So browser knows that, okay, my custom element is something that is not, you know, that it shouldn't throw, it knows that it's also, part of HTML. So it learns about the tag. So let's take an example of a custom element, right? So this is a simple demonstration of a custom element. Let's see what I'm trying to do here. And this, if you understand this, as you understand most of the concepts around. So what I'm trying to first do is I want to create a tag called my slider. Let's look at our main HTML. Basically, I imported the slider.js directly inside my my HTML. So basically, I want to write a simple tag like this, my slider, and I want to put the label. I want the flexibility to change the label. I want to say, yeah, I want the flexibility to change min and the max value, and then I can define my initial input value, and I can define, a label, etc., etc. I think label I've repeated. Let me actually take out one of them. So yes, so this is what I want to do. I don't want to write that slider code. So the slider code is here basically. If you look at the HTML for the slider, it's this. I create the same input div tag and the class slider container. I'm adding it so that I add some CSS to it, and then this is the CSS for that particular slider, and then I have min, max, value, class, etc., etc. And I don't want to, sort of repeat this again and again. I want to define my slider, my own component, basically, that I can reuse multiple of times, right? For example, I used it here. I can, keep reusing it without having to write all these code again and again and again, right? So that's where the custom elements come. So let's look at how you write the custom element. So the way you write the custom element is we use ES6 syntax, which is, we define a class which extends an HTML element. So the reason why it inherits everything from the HTML element is because it gets all the capabilities, like you can attach a shadow DOM. I'll talk about that. Basically, you get all the methods, etc., etc. And this is a JavaScript basically inside this. So let's talk about um, few things here. So first of all, there are specifications, right? Like how this should be done. So one of the important things to understand is, let's save this actually. Let's close this. So look at this. So label, right, is something that I'm changing, min, max, input value. So what are these called? So these are called attributes. And the way we define attributes in the Lightning, sorry, not in the Lightning, in the web component in general is by using get and set. So what I've done for every property that I have created a get syntax and a set syntax, pretty standard. And then you can see all these things where I can say there is a standard for this class. This represents this class basically. So for this class, there's already methods like set attribute, get attribute. So in the get function, I say get that attribute by the attribute name, and the set function, I set it. And then you can see there are a few more things, which is this one, super. So super is basically calling the constructor of this particular class, HTML element, which is basically saying, yeah, import everything from the standard HTML class and then call that constructor of that class. And then what I say is, I generate my own inner HTML, which basically is nothing but the same, slider component that I showed you. But I've had some placeholders here. So wherever I need to actually change or add values, or my values are going to change, I denoted this with, dollar this dot label. Basically this is again the class, and the label is basically whatever, these methods basically. So I say this dot label, so these variables basically. And then I have connected callback. So what is connected callback? So connected callback is also a specified method. What it does is, whenever this whole DOM that you have here attaches, or whenever the shadow DOM actually attaches to the DOM, it calls this method. So forget about what is written inside this. We'll come and look at it. And also I have this method absorb properties. Now what this does is, it actually looks for a change. So we say that, keep this property, which is the input value, which again is a getter and a setter. So we say, absorb this property. That is basically, whenever a change is handled in this property, then call this attribute change callback method. So if I change min or a max, that will not call this attribute call change callback. So the callback is basically like a method that, or an event you can say, which is invoked when the input value is changed, because I've denoted it. Now I can denote multiple of these properties, and then I can segregate out with the name here. So for example, here in the console.log, you'll see it will say name as the input value, because the input value got changed. It will say the old value and the new value. So these are all the specifications actually of um, of a class to define a custom element. So again, I defined a custom element called my own slider. So in the HTML, I can directly use it. So this tag is not defined in the HTML, right? We are custom defining it, and we are associating this with a class called slider, and that has a property called constructor, which is what gets called first. So in the constructor, so now let's come back to some part of the code before. So let's see how this actually looks. Again, what I'll do is I'll just copy the path and just open it in the browser. Let's open it in the browser here and see how this looks. So as you can see, two inputs have rendered, right? And the slider value actually changes. It started with 50, while this started with like 50 again, and um, it started with 100, and then it goes till, I guess, 200, because I've defined the max as 200 for this. I guess for this one also the max is 200. We can change all those things and play around with it. Let's see. So here the input value is 100. We set the max. So so before we actually proceed here, let's actually look at few things in the JS code. So specifically around what is this connected callback, what is the shadow DOM, right? And yeah, if we can define both of these, what these do, then we should be able to actually help ourselves more better in understanding other things. So shadow DOM is basically, so what does shadow DOM mean? So shadow DOM is, so let's go back to the slide to see what definition shadow DOM is. So shadow DOM basically allows the web browser to render DOM elements without putting them into the main document tree, right? So it doesn't allow them to put it into the main document. So let's see what happened here. So I'm gonna go inspect it. Let's inspect this. So as you can see here, shadow root, right? You see this new thing. So my slider. So if you open the my slider, it says there's a shadow root which is open, that has its own style tag in it. It has its own div, etc., etc. It has its own input, right? If you look at the second one, the same thing, right? Has its own shadow root, which is in the open state, and then you have so what is open and closed? So open means, shadow root can be of two types, open and closed. Open, you can think of it like public, you can access internals of this using API. Closed, you can say that, if you try to access the internal of it, the component author can basically lock down. So if you say this dot give me the shadow root of this element, it will say null, because that's been locked down by the developer. So again, shadow DOM is a concept. So not all the browsers support Shadow DOM, and we'll look at that, like what happens if browser doesn't support the Shadow DOM. So Shadow DOM supported browsers. Let's Google this and see what browsers do Shadow DOM supports. So can I use, so this is a, so as you can see, Shadow DOM is, wait, not supported in IE 6, not supported in IE 11, not supported in Edge. Yeah, not supported till 62 version of the Firefox. Google Chrome started supporting after 53 version, etc., etc. So there's still, browsers are trying to catch up, and obviously the recent browser version will support Shadow DOM, but not all the browsers support Shadow DOM. So we'll come back to all these things. But this is a good, you know, good website to kind of check whether what HTML elements or what JavaScript is, supported in which browser versions, etc., etc. Anyway, so Shadow DOM, as I said, let's come back to our code, kind of finish this thing. So Shadow DOM, so look at this, what I did here. This is interesting, right? I said this dot attach. So this means what? Custom element. So to the custom element, I'm attaching a Shadow DOM, and I'm saying, create a Shadow DOM, basically with this dot attach a Shadow DOM. And what should the Shadow DOM have as its own inner HTML? And this is the whole HTML part of it, right? So that's what this does. And connected callback, what am I doing in the connected callback? So in the connected callback, what I'm doing here is I'm saying, get me the element by my range. So as you can see now with the shadow root, so when I say this dot shadow root, what I can do with the component is I can access all of its elements just like as it is, in the normal HTML. I can write get element by ID, so I get element by my range, which is basically this one. I say get me that input. So output for me is basically this spam, which I say get me the output demo, and then say I set the default value as 50, in case somebody doesn't provide that value. And then I say, maybe we don't need this actually. Anyway, so we see this, we say whenever the slider add.listener input means whenever the value is changed, whenever this event get released, then what I do is I say, okay, whatever the value that got changed, assign it to this output spam, and also assign the input value, which is this input value, to to this. So that's what is happening actually, basically. So as you can see, I've got a web component rendered on the browser, and as you can see, if I slide, it starts putting the values here, right? It says, yeah, the value is this, the value is this. I think I commented out this thing because I had set for the initial value. So initial value, you can say it's 50, whatever it is. So what we can do here is basically change things. Now, let's say I want another slider to render, right? So it's very easy from this point is, you have told browser that you have your own my slider by the slider.js script. So now it's very easy. I can name it as slider 1, slider 2, slider 3. So I can change labels as I want. And then I can also do one more thing, which is I can define my own mins and max. So for this, maybe 400, right? For this one, maybe I start with 500 and end with like 1,000, right? For this one, I start with basically, let's say 10 and end with 20, right? With the default values 10, this the default value is 500, etc., etc., right? So basically, yeah. So now we should expect like 4 different sliders running on our pages with etc. As you can see, the 4 different sliders, right? Running on this. This goes to 500. This starts and goes like thousands, right? This starts and goes like, whatever it is, to whatever value. So yeah, so this is an example of a web component, right? I wrote once, reused, reused a lot of things here, kind of defined my own attributes that can change, that the component consumer, which is this HTML tag, can change for me. And I can define, okay, what should happen when the things get changed. For example, in this, I said, yeah, I want to change the values as it is. When this happens, I want to change this, etc., etc. Also, one more thing is, like I said, right, if I change the values, you should see this console. Basically, so when I change this, it says, yeah, I changed the input value, and the old value is 50, I made it to 51, etc. So for everything, it'll track. So I change the input value, the new value is 63, I change it from 62, right? So that's what the power of a web component. Yeah, the web component. Basically, it's available on your browser. There's nothing to understand Salesforce or anything before using them, and you can use it in your web application as well. Like write your own JS files using this kind of structure. But you'll notice that a lot of boilerplate code. And one more thing that you will notice is the bindings. You had to write your own bindings, right? You know, um, you have to own define your specs, etc., etc. So that's where the Lightning Web Components, which is the Salesforce version, we'll see where things have been simplified, and there are some concepts like track properties, there are metadata API support, etc., etc. That we will take a look at that. So let's wrap this up quickly and then go to the Salesforce side of things. Um, okay, so we covered Shadow DOM. Basically, as I said, you can attach Shadow DOM to an element using element.attachShadow. And so Shadow DOM, it's not necessary that you can attach to only the custom element, but you can attach Shadow DOM to anything. Any element, you can access it and attach it. It need not be a custom defined element like what I showed you. And then the other property of Shadow DOM is the CSS encapsulation, which basically what it means is whatever the CSS that I have here, right? So if I define a whole body tag and try to add a CSS, it will not apply to this inner CSS. The reason for that is because this whole thing is encapsulated. It's prevented from bleeding the CSS, right? It will not go inside this and apply to this. That's the property of Shadow DOM, the encapsulation. So we covered the demo. Um, So this is the fundamentals. Actually, this is where it starts. If you need more further understanding on HTML templates or custom elements or Shadow DOM or ES modules, I have some reference in the last. There's a developer.google.com. You can go there and kind of explore more. Or if you go to Mozilla Developer Network, you'll find blogs on that. And Google's some of the UI frameworks like Polymer uses the web components actually for building those reusable components. So let's move back to Salesforce now. Let's talk about Salesforce. So Salesforce released this Lightning Web Components basically. So prior to that, so just to avoid the confusion, prior to that, for the Aura framework and the Aura components, we called them as Lightning components. Um, so now they have been renamed to actually Aura components. So Aura components are the ones that we were building before using attribute tags, etc., etc. I'm going to show you an example of an Aura component and how I converted that into a Lightning Web component. So basically now that's been renamed to Aura components, and it was using Aura framework, and it was not using basically the standard web components that we just discussed. We're not using any of these specifications. So and it was using a custom built framework called Aura, which is again open source. So it was defining its own programming model around it. It had its own way of writing events and defining attributes, etc., etc. And we got used to it, honestly, and we wrote for like 3 years now, and still the support, and it's gonna be exist, and you can use lighting components inside our components, etc., still supported. But the future is lighting web components because they are more close to the standard specification, um, and has more better rendering performance, etc. um, we'll also see that some of the base components that Salesforce provides, which is a part of the Aura framework, but it still uses LWC under the hood. It still uses the web components under the hood. And that's why we recommend that, if something can be done by base components, like last 1 year before Salesforce started recommending, when all these base components came back, that wherever you can use the base components, right? So the reason why base components they recommended is because they internally started retooling them to use these web components standard, which always had better performance and better flexibility. So components built using the web component standard now are referred as lighting web components, which is the new framework. um, and as I said, it adheres more closely with the web standards. And the what Salesforce adds to this lighting web components is their whole platform on top of it, right? Like we had data services, UI APIs, reactive properties, etc. So Salesforce has made it so easier and convenient that you don't have to actually, kind of worry about your data binding, etc. They provide a lot of things for you. You don't have to write a boilerplate code like this, set, get, etc. You don't have to worry about connected callback and all the other things. We'll see that, like, what is the difference actually Salesforce does. It simplifies your code boilerplate to a larger extent. So let's actually get started here with the next slide. All right, so what are the differences between web components and LWC? So web components specifications, like we were seeing, right, in the support, can I use, right, like the shadow DOM, right? The shadow DOM is not, like, what happens if Salesforce customer uses Edge or IE11, which are still supported, right? What happens if one of our customer uses one of these browsers, etc., right? So still they don't want to break your code, right? So that's why Salesforce Lighting web components are more than more than just web components, right? So they add polyfill. So what is a polyfill? So polyfill is like, let's say, this dot shadow function is not supported in I11, they would have like written a polyfill for that, like an equivalent, JavaScripting code to support all those things. Also, you will see that the Salesforce web components, lighting web component, you don't need to use attach shadow or append child methods, etc. So as I said, even the browser does not implement shadow DOM, you still see that Salesforce web components are supported. Also, the other benefit of Lightning Web Component is they are protected by the Locker services. So we know that Locker services from the Aura components, they used to lock down the DOM so that it provides all the security benefits. So you get them as well with the Lightning Web Components. They are also protected by Locker services. Also, that's why, so the web components are currently supported in app builder, community builder, etc. There are few more interfaces inside Salesforce that still doesn't support web components. For example, like flow builder or console apps. But remember that you can always wrap the web component inside an Aura component. So even though they are not supported in all those experiences, theoretically, but practically you can wrap your web component inside an Aura component, and it will still be supported. And there's a support for interpolatability, which is you can communicate between Aura components and lighting components. But remember, the vice versa is not true. That is, you cannot have an Aura component inside a lighting web component. That's definitely not supported. So you'll also see that there are some special methods apart from like all the connected callback method or other methods like get attribute or set attributes. There is a rendered callback method that Salesforce provides. And the rendered callback method basically what it allows you to do is it allows you to actually run some logic after the component has rendered, just like renderer or re-renderer in the Aura component. So for better performance, there are some ES linting rules. That is, you shouldn't use few things. So essentially, the Lighting web components of Salesforce actually supports, a lot of things. ES6, ES7, ES8, ES9, etc., etc. But for the better performance, there are rules. Like for example, you shouldn't use async and await, because the older browsers, are not so compatible. So if you're trying to support I11, you should not use them. So there are a few things like no for off. You shouldn't use inner HTML. You shouldn't use async operation, etc., etc. Just for the better performance. So all the linting rules are located here. All right. So now let's take a look at an example of of a lighting web component. And basically what I want to do is kind of show you how to build a lighting web component in Salesforce. And then what we can do is we can compare that with Aura component and see what all got changed, or how drastic the change was. And after that, what we will do is we will, I'll just walk you through the dev guide, but give you more information around some of the other things that are supported. Um, and then we'll wrap up. So before we move back to the demo, I want to, so there's quite a lot of support for tooling, honestly. Salesforce has its own VS Code extension pack, which has scaffolding and the language grammar plus deployment. If you're not using VS Code extension pack from Salesforce, you should, if you're using VS Code as your editor, because that provides all the good capabilities of saving code, and also language syntax and grammar for Apex and other things. So I would recommend that. Personally, I built an extension myself, so that it supports like faster deploy and better error display than what's on top of Salesforce plugin. So you can also download that from the marketplace, and I actually got used to using that. So let's switch back to Salesforce project here and see some of the fun stuff. So all this code will be shared in the last slide. I mean, the Git link for that, I can download it, but I don't recommend this for this code for the production purposes, because I wrote it only for the demonstration purposes. But you can certainly take concepts from them. And what I highly recommend is to write also tests for that, because the Lighting web components allow us to write just tests. I've not written tests, etc., etc. The simplicity, and I want to keep it to very basic at this point, since we are all trying to learn this framework. So what is that I have built? So before that, as I said, go to the extension, and you can use Salesforce extension. So as you can see, there should be one for Lighting. So the pack itself provide all these things. So Lighting web component itself has this beautiful extension, which provides a lot of different capabilities, right? I want to make sure that you understand that the Lighting web components have better tooling API and metadata API also supported. And the best part about the Lighting web components compared to Aura components are they definitely look very cleaner on the syntax and the other things, and also the tooling support is really good, and you can work in both scratch orgs and non-scratch orgs. So what I'm using is a non-scratch org. It's not a scratch org, etc., etc. Unlike the Trailhead module shows, you can use it with your regular orgs. It should be fine. So So apart from that, I said I built my own extension. You're free to actually use that. Let's see if I have that. So this is one that I built actually. There's few downloads, 569, which is good. Basically what it allows you, so you need to install this plugin before you start using that. So you'll run this on the terminal after you install this, and then you should be all good to actually open your DX project and use it with the non-scratch arcs. So let's actually go look at some stuff here. So let's actually look at our component. So one of the good things about you know this is, if you see in the toolbar, I already have the org logged in, so I can just click on it. This is the feature that is provided by the VS Code extension pack from Salesforce. So I use it often. So basically, this allows me to open the org directly from here without having to go log in, etc., etc. If I'm logged in already using the VS Code. So I have a project set up basically, and this is my org. Let's open the home tab basically. That's where I have my components. Home tab. Let's see home tab. So I have two things here. So this one that you see is basically what it is doing is this one on the right is Aura component. This one on the left is Lightning Web component, and both of them basically do the same thing. Basically, Lightning. If you say Lightning Web components, basically you can search from YouTube. That's what this component does. Just wrote it for the demonstration. So basically, you can search videos from YouTube. Web components, etc. This, as I said, is an Aura component. This is a Lightning component actually on my right. It's a Lightning Web component. So basically I search, it's quite fast, right? As you can see, quite faster than the Aura component. And we'll see how I kind of built this simple thing with Apex, you know, and explore some syntax, so that we are familiar with the syntax, etc., etc. So let's take a look at this. So first of all, I divided. So for the Aura version, actually, Aura version is pretty simple. It's a monolithic thing. I could have broken up into its own search component and its own components, but kind of, built everything in a single thing. So basically, same thing. I create Aura attributes. As you can see, the markup, right? It's too heavier. We created Aura attributes. If you're familiar with Aura components, this is how you declare variables, which is so this is Aura component, by the way. And you will see that Lightning layout. These are all the base components, basically. And then I use the Aura iteration to take the result and kind of like run through it. And then we have this controller JS file and then a helper file. So JS file is basically like when I handle the click, I call the helper method. The helper method actually calls the sets, and then it executes all these boilerplate codes of action, etc., etc., and it executes the action, right? A lot of code again to get a simple thing done, and that for bigger applications you start breaking into attributes. It can be long list of attributes, and declaring variables on the front end, right? It's itself a lot of overhead actually already, and can cause a lot of errors. Honestly, it's been difficult to debug, etc., etc. But I'm not gonna go to the Aura component. Let's come to this new thing in the town, which is web component. So let's look at how I build the web components basically. So web components start with template, right? So this is the search input box basically, which basically has this feature that whatever you type, it just displays it here. So one major difference that you straight away see is in the web component, we used to write something like this, Lightning layout like this, right? Your markup straightly shows that no, that has no closing tags. Even if you close it, if you save it, you might blow your application. Let's try to save it and see what happens. So it clearly says a lot of issues with that. Anyway, I'm not gonna try saving it. So look at the change. Actually, I had to So the colon actually disappeared into a dash, and then everything like the lighting layout item, right? The colon disappeared. What else? So lighting input, again, the colon disappeared. And look at these bindings, right? It was not like this before in the aura. So let's look at how it looks in the aura. So in the aura, we had this thing, and then we had this dollar dot v dot, which was v was the value provider. Um, Here in this case, it's no more. It's like just curly braces and the property name. I'll talk about what is that property name. I'll show you in a bit here. What is that property name? Anyway, so as you can see, very cleaner, and also there's no more to it. There's only 4 files actually, which is the meta XML file, the JS file, the HTML, and the CSS. Pretty straightforward. And then you can actually export modules from other files as well. So it kind of makes reusability very easier. You don't have to create your own markup to make it reusable. It can all be done, using export. So let's look at the controller aspect of it. So basically, as you can see, where did this variable come from? Like the search string, right? If you look at the JS for it, so that's where it starts. So you always import a lighting element because that's what your default class is going to extend from, right? So we were writing this. So when we were writing the web component or the previous component that I was showing you, we were extending it from the HTML element, right? But in the lighting world, it looks like Salesforce has created its own lighting element module, which is what every component that we custom write will extend from. And then we have this track, which is very interesting, right? We also imported the track from this LWC module. And then you can also import few more things like API. You can also import wire. And you can see if you don't use them, it will throw an error that it is declared but not used as a linting that's been configured. But I'll talk about what those APIs, tracks, etc., are. But for time being, remember that tracks are basically it gives you one-way data binding and private binding, meaning what happens is the search string that I have here, right? I can only access this inside this particular component. Now, if this component gets used inside other component, which if this gets overlapped and used inside other components, then you will see that basically you cannot set this directly as an attribute if you mark it with track, because track makes it reactive, but what it does is it still keeps that variable private. So basically you can mark as many variables as you want as track. So in my scenario, the search string is actually track. And then so handle keychain is the method that gets called whenever there is a change. So you can have a change handler. So whenever the lighting input changes, that is whenever I change the value of it, I call the handle keychain event. And the value, which is basically what you displayed here, right? The value binding. So the value binding is again to that particular JS track variable. So that can be binded, that becomes one-way binded, right? So whenever it changes, I can change the value and the whole component re-renders to, sort of take that new value. So that's what is happening here. So whatever I'm typing, you can see it here, and here. So the way it is happening is because it's one-way binded now, with the UI. So handle click is a function for that button click. So when I call a button, so what I'm doing here is one more thing is the event handling, right? So I wanted to build in an event design way, that is use event driven. So meaning when I click on search, I'm releasing a custom event called search, and the detail actually, so this is again, this custom event definition is a part of web component standards. You can, this is a JavaScript actually where this is how you release an event. So when I click this search button, I'm releasing this handle click event, which basically tells the name of the event, which is search. And then I say what data it should take, which is the search string that the user types. And then I say dispatch that event actually. And how do I handle that event in my YouTube search component? it's basically very simple. It's unlike, so in the previous Aura world, how did you handle it? By using Aura register tag, handlers, Aura handler to handle it. Used to write a lot of markups for that, a lot of boilerplate code, right? For this, it is very, very simple. It is straightforward. So we define the type of the event. So I will have another attribute called on search. Now, where this on search came from? Search came from the name, that is this name that I defined for the event, right? And on is the definition, the keyword prefixed word that gets automated. So on with something means it is an event with this particular name. So I say, okay, on search, handle search is my new, maybe I misspelled here, sorry about that, but I can quickly change it here. So, and handle search is basically what I call. So here I call handle search. So handle search is what I call, right? So when I do handle search, it should. So let's understand this code. So this is where it connects to Apex. So in the Aura world, we used to write everything in the markup, as I already said. In the Lightning component, web component world, we import everything. So we say, so there are a lot of modules actually that Salesforce gives. One of the modules is add Salesforce/Apex module. So this will give us, and then I can say, okay, which class and which method. So I import the search method basically. So now what I can do is on search handle, I can call that method basically. So YouTube search.search is nothing but I would have created a class here. Let's see. So let's go to the YouTube search. So this is the search class where I pass the string, right? So as you can see here, what I'm doing is I invoked this class, and then search string is nothing but the parameter again. Where is the parameter here? It's the parameter here, and that's the same parameter here. So I could have easily wrote this. So this is called promise. So promise, basically, if you have not worked with promises, the syntax might seem a little weird. That's what happened to me first time when I looked at promises, because I'm used to so much of coding Apex. So this might seem like interesting thing, but promises are basically you can create a promise, and then to resolve a promise, you always have then and the catch block. So basically this is the method, then you say then what happens. So the result is what that comes back. And then if there are error, what happens, which is basically error that comes back. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting this tracked array called, so this is of type array. So I'm setting it here. So if you look at my HTML markup, so we use the Aura iteration, right? We used to use, now we have this template for each component, which allows us to kind of, run like a iteration, like Aura iteration. So that's what I do. I use the for each, which basically is the each item. And for the first immediate element, you also need the key. So you assign that key, and then this is the items that I get from server, and then I iterate over this particular entire template. Now I could have converted this whole thing into a component in itself, and this code would have further simplified it. Um, that's the way to do do it. Now the other thing is, what I wanted to show you is, so this code is working, right? Like when I type something, it's actually fetching it, right? Say Lightning web component. Oh, I misspelled it. Lightning web component. Search it, right? It actually reflects me, although there you go. The Jitendra Jha sessions and other sessions that are there or done so far has been retrieved here as a search result. So yeah, as I said, as a syntax. So this thing works for us, right? Now let's actually, so as I said, you can always use ES7, ES8, ES9, other things as well. So in ES6 or ES7, so the JavaScript defined this async call, which is basically writing, instead of promise, you can use async and await. So I can even write async and await on this, and it will still work. So that's what I want to show you. I can write this whole thing as an async and await call. So I just wrote, so async means I make this function async, which says that this function is asynchronous. Now I can inside this, I can await for it. So I say, okay, wait for the time till this particular function executes, which is searching the Salesforce database, and then get the result here, and then basically populate this variable. If there are any issues, catch it. So this more feels like, front end. This more feels like a backend code, right? Rather than this, because this one, so you can actually use it, but I don't recommend using it because it's part of the lint rules where it said, don't use async and await, because there are browsers that are not supporting async and await. You can even check here, actually, can I use async, right? Let's see. So async, so it looks like the IE11 supports it. There's a good amount of support for it, but still the older browser doesn't support it. Let's look at await here. So await, yeah, await is not supported still in IE11, right? So there are browsers that will not support few things, but so that's why stick to the lint rules of LWC. But I want to show you that even this works. Now look at my thing. You can always deploy this using Salesforce's what is this? So deploy source to org, or I created my own utility where you can say Control S and it runs this command, and then it runs this little utility that I have, and it'll save to the server. So it's quite faster than what Salesforce does. And Salesforce says there's a little bug in way they in the metadata API basically, and they're fixing it. So that's good news. So if you use Salesforce deploy this to source org, it'll just take lots of time than what my plugin did actually. It take considerable amount of time because they have to zip it, send it, and then the whole metadata deployment actually runs. So there you go. So it finally deployed. And kind of hard to parse this myself, and so I wanted better functionality, better error. So as you can see, this code will also work, the code that I have, right? So the code here, let's search something, writing web component. There you go. It still works, with the async and await syntax. Very clean way to write it, but unfortunately, as I said, there are browsers which might not support await. So let's actually give it some time before we write programming like this. Kind of be happy with this syntax, right? So again, I can deploy this easily to Salesforce environment just by doing Control S, just to override on my API to be 45th, kind of deploy it pretty fast, slick. Okay, so perfect. So this is how we built Lighting Web Component. Kind of, let's go through the slides quickly and kind of wrap this up. I can show you a few more things, but maybe another session or something. But I think this is good enough for basics of it. So let's have a slide which compares LWC with Aura components. Basically, as you can see, Aura attribute syntax, right? Aura attribute syntax is, as you can see, attribute name at API my property is how it translates into, and this you write it inside the markup. Here, everything went into the JavaScript. Also, no more multiple JavaScript files, right? Everything can be its own bundle. V dot, $V dot, no need for like $V dot anymore. You can just bind it like this. No more need for that handler in the register for the event handling. As I said, it's simplified with new function. CSS, this is something that I did not talk about, but in CSS, we always use this followed by something, um, now it's more standard. So all you do is my class, kind of add it. Aura facet. So if you have used Aura facets or like Aura components inside an Aura component, and if you've used Aura facet, it basically translate into slots in Lightning Web Components. We talked about slots, right? They are just placeholders in your markup to dynamically inject something. Also, let's look at this lightning colon layout item. It more translates now into this type of lighting dash syntax, and now more into this one. So that's what the comparison for me. So more importantly, look at the syntax. It's more cleaner. You know what you're importing, and then you just play around with it. Then you export it basically so that this can be reused. Couple of things, if you want to add targets, you add it here. There's no design file um, like or a components, but you can add everything like design parameters inside this particular meta XML basically. And you have to say is exposed true for it to be available in the Lighting App Builder, Community Builder. There are specific tags to specify the targets here. So before I wrap up, I quickly want to spend like 5 minutes, um, 5 minutes before we kind of actually go through, um, uh, you know, go through some more basics actually. So one of the things that actually was interesting was, reactive properties. So basically what reactive property means is, when you read in the documentation, it simply means that whenever a value is changed, right, your template automatically re-renders. That is, what is happening in this example that we showed is, whenever my value provider, which is basically this search string, got changed, it re-rendered this whole thing, and that's why we can see the new string, because new value get binded and that is translated back. Okay, so that's what reactive property means. Now, as I said, there are ways to make it public. If you use add API, then if you mark your attribute as a add API, the other components that are using, the component, for example, if I would have marked track instead of track, I would have marked it with add API, then the other components, which is basically the YouTube search, could have set this value directly, without any problems. It can access that as an attribute. But we don't make, just like how you don't make all classes public, right? The specific classes you want to make it private. So similar thing happens here. Like, you don't make all the classes public, or mark them with add API only if you need it. Otherwise you go with add track. And also mark only those variables add track that you want it to be binded to the UI. So if you have a variable, it's not that you just go mark everything as add track, because what will happen is, there will be performance cost to all these things. So, take a better judgment, like only the variables that you want to bind it to the UI, you can mark it with add track, not everything. So other thing I want to show you is the Lightning data service. So basically there's a whole lot of documentation. I don't want to get into depth of it, but if you go to the standard documentation, you will find like all the data services, all the components that were used in the Aura are straight away supported. And more importantly, if you go to the reference, you can see how you can import few things, like for example, the record API, how you can create records in Salesforce, delete records, access some UI APIs, access object info, pick list values, etc., etc. That were really difficult in the Aura framework because you have to write a lot of backend code. So here you don't have to. There are modules that already Salesforce provides, and you just import that modules and work with it. So there are decent examples, and the documentation is very good to actually help you with building this. So it shouldn't be that hard once you sort of import this code. And also there's a playground where you can actually play with few of the tags, right? Like you can create your own little project. Now this doesn't save to Salesforce. It's just like you can run it, you can download it, share it, just like CodePen or JS Fiddle. It's similar experience to that. It's a great utility to actually get used to and play. There's a lot more in the documentation. Actually, in one session I cannot cover everything, but I think I just hope that I've given you enough info to actually go explore yourself, um, the official docs, and also look for this launch event, which is Salesforce is launching these web components. You can sign up for this. It's on 23rd of January, which is Wednesday. And all the resources I think that I found it helpful for this presentation are here, and also the GitHub resources are here if you want to kind of fork that code and see and play around with that. So I'll open the forum for Q&A.
Hey, thanks, Mohit. It was really a great session. So one of the questions that came up in the chat section, like, can you use the Lightning component inside a Lightning record page?
Yes,
I think that
definitely.
meta.xml. Yeah, yeah. Please
Yeah,
go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, definitely you can use it. I see there are docs to help you with that. Um, yeah, you can definitely use it. As you can see, I was marking this for the record page. Where is it? So I was marking. So I also marked this component available for the app page, record page, home page. So you can mark it. And as I say, it works with the data services. So there should be an example here how to, sort of wire this up using the wire API. Um, and use it basically inside. So this is an example that's self-sourced, right? You can import all these objects and IDs, and then whatever the property. So at API record ID will always be available for you on the page, so that you know the record ID of the context, and then you can import the schema. And then whatever you mark with @wire, what does it denote is whenever something changes, like whenever this field changes, @wire property changes, and that re-renders the whole template. Um, so there are sufficient examples for you to explore.
Perfect. And I think we need to include that in the meta.xml, right?
Yeah. So this is the meta.xml that I'm showing you. You have to say that it's available for the record page.
Exactly. Perfect. Arjun, I think that answers your question. Going to the next question, is Visual Force Studio okay? The question is like, is it Visual Force Studio is the only is required to do the development, or can we do the development in the developer console?
Yeah. So no dev console support for this, and it's not gonna be. Even in the future, Salesforce not planning to add support for that to the dev console. So I'm actually looking at the blog that one of the product managers from Salesforce wrote recently. Just looking at it. Where is it? So the future of Salesforce IDEs, right? So if you look at this, right? Um, so the future is, so if you read through this, they are depreciating force.com IDE support, and also no dev console support for, in fact, the dev console itself will go away once they have something better, right? So that's the answer. So we know that, dev console is actually going to, um, dev console is also going away, and they are working on something better, a better web development based experience. So Lightning web components can't be created, um, using developer console. And only way to do that is by using Salesforce CLI. Now you don't need Visual Studio Code, honestly, if you don't kind of use that in your day-to-day life, but I would strongly recommend to use it if you're not using any editors, because it provides great editing capabilities, and you can use that to scaffold it basically. So that's what they provide in the LWC bundle. If you today go and say, yeah, you should see an option to say create Lightning web component. Once you create that, it'll create the folder structure for you, and from that time you can write code, save it. As I said, you can save it like that, or you can use my extension, which is Salesforce DX Code Companion, which I wrote for myself. We can use that as well, because that also takes care of saving, at least. It's pretty fast. So you just say Control S, change the file, and it actually figures out that it's LWC bundle, LWC command, saves it, just deploys it like this. It's ease. Yes, go ahead. Any other questions?
Yes, one more question here. Like, can you explain the reactive property again? How different it is from re-rendering?
Which property?
The reactive.
Reactive properties. Okay, so reactive properties, as I said, a property is a reactive, which means if a value for this change, as a part of some other component setting it, if it is declared with that API, or let's say you have a method that changes this property, what happens is, like example, search string, right? So search string, if something changes to the search string, either you change it on the handle of the key event, or let's say, on key up, you change the value. What happens is, whenever this value changes, if this value is referenced in the HTML, then the whole HTML actually renders to reflect the new values, That's what the reactive property is all about.
Perfect. We'll take one more question here, Mohit.
Yeah.
Can we use a JS Force library in the web component? If I'm not wrong, we cannot use it with the Aura component. The JS Force library with the web component.
That's a good question actually. So you can use JS for some, library with a component. I've just not done myself, but it has to be Locker compliant, first thing, and second thing, you have to import that whole JS force inside Salesforce static resource, and then only. So any third-party library that you use has to come from static resource. So you'll basically import that from the static resource, and then you can try using that. But again, I think you will run into session ID issues because JS Force itself requires session ID to actually go connect to the Salesforce environment. So there will be some issues. I mean, with using that. I've personally not tried it, uh, but yeah, I mean, there's nothing that you can't use it. You just experiment with it. But my gut feeling says that you'll run into some kind of a limitation with it. But really, why do you need JS Force is something that is interesting actually, because most of the thing is provided by the with the UI components and etc.
Framework,
etc.
the framework itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you want to take one more question?
Yeah,
If you
sure.
are okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Can you please explain the?
yeah, we can go till 10:30 actually.
Oh, that's perfect. Okay. Can you please explain about JSON files in the LWC bundle that came from Vanu? JSON files in LWC bundle.
Okay, so let's look at this. So we have two JSON files here. One is jsconfig.json, right? And the other is eslint.json, right? So these are the two files basically. So eslint.json is basically what it is doing is it is extending this eslint config lwc, which I showed you already. So let's look at this. So this is eslint config lwc. So basically what it's doing is providing some linting capabilities, like if you miss do something, it auto suggests that there's some things that are not correct, or not recommended. So that's what eslint rc does. The jsconfig.json. So jsconfig.json, what it does, I think, is it generates a .ed.ts file basically. So again, I don't know exactly what it generates, but I'm thinking it is transpiling something to transpiling. So this is the one. So you see, so for example, what it is doing is it is transpiling. I think what it is doing is it is actually getting us all the modules that Salesforce provides, right? When I import apex.t, yes, it provides me all the modules basically that Salesforce has written for me, So you don't have to
I
worry
think
about this file. It's basically default interfaces that Salesforce provides, so that we can actually import in our thing.
exactly. I also think so. It's like basically, including the framework, modules
Yeah,
to the
exactly.
project.
Yeah, exactly. So as you can see, I have all these like Chart.js, Lightning React.js. So I have all these things as the library actually in my org. These are all static resources. So I think it just imports the module so that we can import it. So I think this they are doing to avoid the error, right?
Right.
Because if you import in the Visual Studio, if you don't, if it doesn't find the module, it will just throw an error, right? That's what it's doing. It's declaring the modules. So it's in the typings folder and in the LWC folder, and that's what this where this the JSON actually does. Which you don't have to worry about it. They scaffold it for automatically for you. So it said, yeah, I have these two components currently, and take those two components and kind of create a .tds declaration, so that it can be exported in other components basically. Oh, sorry, imported in other components. That's it.
Okay, that's good. I don't think we have any more questions, but if you think you have any more questions, you can always post it to Twitter, Success Community, and tag Mohit and myself. We'll be more than happy to, provide you the answers.
All right.
I think that's all, Mohit. Really, really appreciate, your time and giving this valuable session to us. It's really helpful and it's really detailed.
Thank you.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to, I've already recorded the session. I'm going to upload the session as well as the slides to the, to all the social network, including the Success Community, Facebook and Twitter, LinkedIn, and yeah, you can take that and you can reference as well in future. Thank you again, Mohit, for all your time.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Okay, bye bye. Have a nice weekend, guys.